Today, we'll be discussing the assessment of sustainability outcomes. There have been a lot of ways that sustainability has been defined over the years. Fortunately, more recently, there have been efforts to come up with a comprehensive definition of sustainability. But there remain some challenges in research. First of all, the variety of different innovations that are studied can make it challenging because a study on something like electronic health records might look very different from the sustainment of a more complex mental health intervention. So learning across the literature can be somewhat challenging, particularly when we were looking at sustainability in different ways and using different measures. Funding can also be a challenge because we need to look over the long term. Often funding ends after the implementation phase is completed, and there can be a lag during which we could be getting critical information for studying sustainment. Finally, there have been a lot of different measures, and we don't have measures of some key constructs. Earlier research on sustainability was often retrospective, and the appropriate prospective measurement strategies weren't used. Another challenge is that implementation ending and sustainment beginning is kind of fuzzy. There's often a 2-year rule of thumb, and others have suggested looking at sustainability after implementation supports have been withdrawn. But that's not always a really clear break. Sometimes some supports remain, some go away. And so figuring out exactly when and how to look and start considering sustainment can be challenging. Also, systems change over time. And so we can't always really get a good snapshot of what's going on in terms of sustainability if we just look at a single time point. Sometimes there's a lull, for example, if there are staffing changes when the intervention is being provided less. But then if you look back in 6 months, things are up and running again. So assessing at multiple time points can be very important. And then finally, there's mutual influence among the different determinants of sustainability. And so measuring and looking very carefully at interrelated constructs becomes important. There have been some attempts to look at sustainment outcomes, and there are more under development. But two that are out there now are the stages of implementation completion, which includes the sustainment phase, and then the program of sustainability assessment tool. So it's important to look at these and other measures that come out to see if they fit with the intervention and with the approach that you're using. Sometimes, though, it's important to come up with very intervention-specific measures. So, for example, in a study that we're doing comparing 2 different learning collaborative strategies, one involves continuous quality improvement, the other is more focused on fidelity. We're assessing a number of different aspects of sustainability. And we're doing that through different measurement strategies. So, for example, for reach and penetration, we're looking at the medical records to see how many people are eligible and how many actually receive the intervention. But we're also looking at self-report and doing detailed interviews around this. We're randomly selecting session recordings and looking at using a fidelity measure for the intervention itself, which is cognitive processing therapy. And at the same time, we're rating and looking at adaptations using the frame to characterize the adaptations. But we're also doing interviews, looking at self-reports, and also looking at the learning collaborative meetings to see when and how adaptation is discussed. We're looking at costs and consequences of the different learning collaborative strategies. And then we're also looking at capacity in a few ways. We're looking at proportion of providers who are qualified to deliver the treatment. We're looking at turnover. And then we're also looking at aspects of implementation climate for our examination of capacity. And then finally, we're looking at clinical outcomes by using measures in the electronic health records. So some recommendations for research. First, identify a working definition and define the key outcomes at the outset with stakeholder input. Make sure you're measuring what's important to your stakeholders. When we look at determinants, it's important to use a multi-level model. There are a number of models and frameworks of sustainability, and there are also implementation frameworks that might be useful. Assess at multiple time points so that you can really look at the dynamic nature of implementation and of the system in which the intervention is being implemented. and assess multiple perspectives. Sometimes when we talk with a leader, they might have a sense that the intervention is still being delivered, but then when you look on the ground, you might see that it's actually only being partially sustained, or that there have been really significant adaptations that you wouldn't learn about by just talking to someone in a leadership role. Observation or fidelity ratings can allow you to look at fidelity and also to look at adaptation through observation and measurement. And it's important to study both so that you can really learn about the role that adaptation or modification plays in sustainability. And then finally, a mixed methods approach can be important so that you really understand the how and get some more detailed information about what's going on in terms of sustainment and in terms of the different influences on sustainment using both a qualitative and a quantitative approach.